welcome to the Lean CEO podcast, a series focused on giving you ideas how to move from traditional to holistic enterprise and begin to manage the company as a whole. Join us as we learn insights and lessons straight from the audio and today's most impact-oriented holistic enterprise leaders. Hello everyone, this is Laura Gerrits Gedvilė. I'm holistic coach and your host today, and welcome to the Lean CEO podcast. Today I'm really fortunate to join Jeremy Cox, who is a systems thinker, consultant, lecturer, and a dad, and I already hear Jeremy smiling. And today we will talk about how to bridge the gap between dysfunctional and holistic enterprise. And it's really amazing topic for me. So hi, Jeremy.
Hello, and thank you very much for inviting me on. It's great to be here.
Oh, you are so welcome. And I still remember how we met in 2017 at Master in Lean Enterprise program, which is held by Buckingham University in the UK. And the students of this program are lean consultants, continuous improvement, and operational excellence people from all over the world. And we, as your students, been really lucky to spend a couple of weeks with you at Welsh Ambulance Services. Do you still remember these couple of weeks?
Very well, yeah.
Yeah, but in these couple of weeks, you introduced us to a thing called systems glasses. And I still remember how overwhelmed we all been, like after these 5-10 days of studying Welsh Ambulance Services, that we understood that the efficiency of the entire system is so much rooted in the management underlying thinking. And that was actually the reason why I really wanted to make a podcast with you. It is one of the reasons that you have both experiences from working in service environment and as well in manufacturing, because you have a engineer background yourself, which is quite rare nowadays.
Yeah. Especially in the UK.
Is it? Okay. It's the same in Lithuania. So people either go for engineering or for more social, like disciplines, not combining these two. So, and the other reason was since the podcast is deliberately created for CEOs who want to change the current management system, but maybe don't dare or doesn't know how. So if you could give a glimpse of what are these system glasses helping to see the system outside in, I thought that would be really a value-adding podcast. So Jeremy, my first question is then, so what are these system glasses helping to see the business from outside in?
Yeah, so I guess it's a deceptively simple and obvious idea, but one actually that's really uncommon in most organisations. So fundamentally, I think it's about helping people understand how their organisation works from an external perspective, the perspective of the people that the organisation is there to serve or service or provide products for. So, just a dead simple example of where we were together in the Welsh Ambulance Service, we were starting by looking at the non-emergency part of the system, so helping people with maybe long-term conditions like diabetes to travel to the local hospital to receive dialysis treatment. And what you tend to find in most organisations, and it was the same there, it was the managers will have an internal focus, so they're worried about efficiency. So are we using our ambulances at best capacity? How do we schedule the work? How are we managing our staff? And it's really difficult if you start with that internal focus to really understand how well the service is working from a patient's point of view. So let's just take the story of a patient who has diabetes. They have to go to hospital 3 times a week. They have to sit connected up to a dialysis machine for several hours. They then need to travel home again, and the patient transport service will take them from home to the hospital. And in Wales, that could be quite a significant distance because a lot of rural communities. Now, think about it. If you were in that position as a patient, what would a good service look and feel like to you?
It's a perfect question.
Yeah, and I guess you'd want to know when will I be picked up? Is it going to be safe? Is it going to be reliable? Do I have kind of clarity about when and how that service will work? Because the dialysis is a big imposition in my life. It's a regular pain. I just want it to be easy and simple and not have any hassle. Now, again, that might sound really obvious, but organizations,
it's not, right?
Yeah, it's just uncommon. And other people being transported by the ambulance, and here's a real kicker, are different. So the people who are travelling for dialysis treatment are doing it 3 times a week. It's a regular part of their life. Other people may be being transported to hospital for the first time. Yeah, or
exactly.
once. And they may be fearful, or they might not know where they're going. They might not know their way around the hospital. So there's a really, really important, I think, two important insights there. One is you just have to stand in the place of the person who's using the service in order to understand what good looks like. If you do that, that is the route to designing great service, whether that's a public not-for-profit system or a commercial system. It's the route to great service, but also reduce cost. Because if you do the things that matter to customers, and only those things, you will find that you provide better services and you strip out loads of inefficiency from your system.
I think what is really fascinating, because when you look from the internal point of view without the systems glasses, outside-in glasses, then you probably would define the non-ambulance service as a transportation from A to B. But once you add the patient perspective, the patient's questions and the patient's needs, then suddenly it gets completely different angle to the business as a purpose, right? Which is really fascinating.
Yeah, and there's another system I've worked in which actually is very similar to the patient transport service, which is transporting children with special educational needs. So in the UK, they're provided with transport to and from their school, and that turns into, with an internal perspective, just as you've described, a system that's about efficiency of managing the transport routes. So how do we schedule the transport routes? How do we negotiate with the transport and taxi firms on lower journey costs? But when you begin to study from the point of view of the young people and their families, you discover actually that not everybody needs to be transported. Not everybody wants to be transported. What matters to some people
doesn't matter to
is the service. Yeah, the service helps them to build their independence. So over a period of weeks or months or years, the transport system actually can help people to become more independent travellers. And therefore the cost evaporates over time. You're not worried about efficiency of transport primarily. You're worried about, is this service really creating value and doing something useful?
So if I could go to the second question now, relating to these outside-in glasses of system, do you think there is still a difference between manufacturing and service? And if yes, how do you see that difference? Because I, like, being completely honest, for me, everything is a service. Literally, if I need now a new car, then I go to the Mazda car center and I buy a new Mazda. For me, it's still not only a product. It's so much more around it.
Yeah, and I think there's many similarities and many differences. So fundamentally, I think your overriding principle in manufacturing and service should be the creation of value. Do we really understand what matters to people? So if Laura goes to the Mazda garage, there are lots of features of how you interact with them that are really important to you. So when I go to a motor garage, I don't want to be sold to. I want to be helped. And if people don't interact with me in a way that I find helpful, I'll walk away. So there's lots you can do to treat parts of the manufacturing system as a service system. But I think the fundamental difference is that when you're kind of in the guts of the manufacturing system, where you're actually producing vehicles or any other physical product, you can do kind of more detailed and more isolated work on the manufacturing flow of work itself, without kind of worrying too much about the wider organizational system. I think in service systems there are many more interconnections, many more interrelationships. So, if you're in a financial services organization, it's not just about processing an application for a new product like a bank account or a mortgage. There's a whole bunch of other interactions and kind of life cycle issues that you need to worry about with that person. If you're in a social care system, it's not a production line. It's a whole series of complex interactions with people and families. So the nature of the way that products and services are provided in service systems, I think, is very different. It's much more dynamic. There's much more interaction with the customer and the people that are providing service. And I think it's really important kind of not to transplant kind of manufacturing methods straight into service systems, but to think very carefully about what's needed. So
because this is unfortunately what I see is happening, like literally lean philosophy, which is coming from manufacturing setting, is being interpreted from manufacturing to service directly, without, as you say, looking at all these interdependencies, all these networks which are in the service system. Why do you think that happens so often?
I think it's because people are attracted to solutions and to tools and techniques. Okay. So, if you've been taught something like 5S or spaghetti diagrams or something like that as part of a lean training program, then, the temptation is to go and reuse the tool on the next problem that you have. So, I remember from a personal point of view years ago, discovering kind of control charts and understanding the theory of variation and how to understand how variation affects systems. And I was kind of convinced that if only I could teach everybody else how to use control charts, I could make the world a better place. Now of course, I then become attached to the tool, not the underlying idea. And what would have been much more helpful for me would have been to look for opportunities to kind of see problems of variation in systems. So, for example, people might be struggling with the variation in volume of work that arrives throughout a day, or the length of time it takes to do a piece of work might be really variable. But instead of forcing people down the route of use the control chart, it would have been much more helpful to just sit with people, understand what mattered to them, the problems that they were facing, and find ways to help them kind of get their head around it. And eventually you arrive at the tool. So I think there's a really big, just kind of basic human problem that we all just like to take shortcuts. So, the easy thing to do is not sit back and think about a problem. It's just to go straight to the thing we're familiar with.
Yeah, because our brain needs the answers. It just can't, be silent without the answer and experiment.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
I see. So if to summarize the differences between service and manufacturing, do I understand correctly that the way you see it's much more co-creation, much more interdependencies between different functions in service rather than in manufacturing setting, right, Jeremy?
Yeah, and I think the dynamism is important to understand as well.
Yeah.
So
you mentioned that
the way that you actually kind of deliver a service is dynamic as well. So, you and I will be interacting as you provide me with the service. That will change my understanding of what matters. and it will change the way that the service can be provided. You can problem solve in real time. You can create different solutions in real time. You can also make a hash of things in real time. So
it is co-creation with the customer, much more intense in service rather than in manufacturing. Okay. And if I would be the CEO, right, the one who really wants to make a management shift in the company I am managing, how could I notice certain dysfunctional elements in my management system? Where could I look for them? In order to begin to trigger my mind, what is here I need to change? What would be your suggestions?
So I think the really important thing is for senior leaders to understand the difference between what senior people think happens in their kind of top of the hierarchy space and what really happens in ground reality. So there will, in all organisations, be a difference between what senior leaders intend, here are the plans, here are the strategies, and how that gets deployed through the organisational system into reality. So a quick story to illustrate that. I worked with a housing organisation a number of years ago where we were looking at the repairs system. So this is a kind of an organisation with about 30,000 properties, public housing. And we were looking at the way that the system worked to repair properties. So this could be people with, broken windows, leaky plumbing, that type of thing. And we were discovering lots and lots of examples of poor service, inefficiency, a really not great repairs process. And the operations director said, I understand everything that we're seeing here, but what I don't understand is why we have such high customer satisfaction scores. So how can we have such a terrible service with really, really good customer service scores? Because it's taking us, 6 visits to repair a leaking tap.
Oh, wow. Okay.
How come our customer satisfaction's, 95%? So I said, well, okay, let's not try and figure this out. Let's just go to the places where work is being done to understand. So we've already been out with, customers and tradespeople to see repairs being done. We kind of know that the system isn't working well. Let's go to the place where the customer satisfaction scores are done. So we found out that there was a lady in the office that collected customer satisfaction scores. She hadn't met the ops director before, didn't know who they were. And we sat with her and asked her to explain, how do you produce the customer satisfaction scores? And she said, well, we have feedback forms that we receive from customers. And I sort them into 2 piles. The first pile is people that are happy with the service. And the second pile is people that are unhappy. And she actually showed us the piles. And the unhappy pile was much bigger than the happy pile. And you could see the ops director looking at the 2 piles saying, that doesn't correspond to the number that we receive in our management reports. Okay. Because the management reports tell us it's 95% satisfied. So then I said to her, okay, so then what do you do? Well, she says, well, we've been told that we have to improve customer satisfaction.
Okay, that's the target.
Yeah, so that's come top down. And I knew that where that had come from, it was from the ops director who was sitting next to us. But I'd asked the ops director to, remain quiet and just let's discover. So she said, because we know we have to improve satisfaction, what I do is I go through all of the ones where people have said they're not happy, and I decide whether I think it's reasonable or not. And the ones where I think it's not really reasonable for the customer to say they're unhappy, I move them over into the satisfied pile.
Okay.
And then we do that until we get to the point where we've produced a customer satisfaction score that is going to be acceptable to the organisation.
Okay. And the reality score. Yeah. Okay.
So the ops director is looking at the pile now changing from unhappy to happy as the lady sorts through them and makes her own judgment about whether she thinks it's fair. But she's doing that to change the score. And then I said to her, so, why do you do that? It's because we were instructed to improve customer satisfaction, and of course the ops director is sitting there saying, I did that. That instruction came from me. So now the leader is sitting there thinking, I can see a difference between what we intend to happen in our, very well intentioned, very well organised business planning and annual target setting processes. We can see our leadership intent being dissolved or changed or altered or misunderstood as it works its way through the organisational system. So whether that's through fragmentation or the classic problem of kind of silos not talking to themselves, or the pressure of targets, or whatever that's happening in the organisation, if you can study, I think, the purpose and the intent and how that gets deployed into ground reality, and how that then relates to what really matters to customers. So you're bringing the outside in dimension in. You'll often see a difference between what we're really doing in ground reality, whether it's in a manufacturing process or the service interface with the customer. How does that relate to what really matters to customers, and how does that relate to the leader's intent in the organisation? And that's often a really useful starting place.
And that's probably the cause of all the silo-based performance. If the intention is wrong, by looking internally, then still all the leaders, they think that they do their best, and we've really all been taught to manage for the result and to give the clarity to people, like targets and measures, so people would know, how to do the work best. And so it's all still from the good intentions, but these intentions were as well like a narrow made without having these outside in glasses, without looking at the system as a whole.
Absolutely. So and I think your point there is really important. Is you have to assume that the intent is good. So whatever the structures are, whatever the things that are actually creating problems, they generally have been created with a good intention. So and this idea, I think, of combining going to ground reality to understand really what matters to customers, and also the extent to which the organisation is affecting our ability to do what matters to customers is really important. And you have to have people see that for themselves. You can't tell them.
No, because that's my other question would be, okay, if I am the CEO who really deliberately doing my own best to manage the company as a whole. I don't want to manage it in separate parts. It just happens somehow because my knowledge is the way it is. So how can I, and with whom help, I could actually walk the floor to the reality, to Gemba in the lean terms, and maybe have someone triggering me to answer these questions? Because only by sitting, with the business plans and development plans of the business, I wouldn't probably even think that I should go and look for those dysfunctional elements, because it's completely new for me as the CEO.
Yeah, and I think that's where. Whether it's a skillful friend within the organisation or an external consultant that can help, having somebody who can, with empathy and skill, help you to see things differently and see because if the ops director in the example of the housing organisation had sat with the lady who was effectively kind of massaging or fiddling the customer scores, the easiest thing to do would be to interpret that as a bad person cheating, and instead of seeing actually her behaviour as being kind of driven by the organisational system and ultimately by my pressure as a director into the system to improve customer satisfaction. The question really I have to ask myself is, how come that didn't result in people problem solving and learning about what matters to customers and how to improve the system? It just resulted in people fiddling the numbers. So people really, it's it's not sufficient just going to the Gemba to try and understand ground reality. You have to be able to process what you're seeing in a sensible way.
Yeah, and as well to know where to look for. Because if you go to just every function of the org structure you still won't see the whole, and you may actually make some wrong impressions. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important thing, for leaders in organisations to hear is if you're thinking of working with consultants or people to help you, you must select people who have that skill, who are really interested in helping you see reality as it is, not in just agreeing that they will do the project as you currently think it ought to be done.
Yeah, and deliver the result, because it's again co-creation with the CEO, as I call a dance with the CEO can only happen if he's dancing as well. Yeah. Okay, that's really, really interesting. And right now I'm writing this dissertation paper for Buckingham Enterprise, Lean Enterprise Masters, and I'm writing about how daily visual management can actually help to create completely different infrastructure, different measures, and different discipline, helping those senior leaders to see the reality. And it is really interesting because in the beginning, I thought that it's that it will be a lot of literature around daily visual management in service, but actually it wasn't at all. It's a big gap. But what I found about the competences, since you are mentioning the leaders' competences, that there is a new competence emerging in a leadership discipline, and it is called system designer, an architect of the system, different words. So suddenly it's changing from navigator, from captain, but being a designer, an architect, a constructor. And by that, it's meant that, every CEO should understand how the system is behaving on all the interdependencies it has, not only based on the org structure, which is really fascinating because none universities are teaching that. Well, at least in Vilnius, there are no universities teaching the systems perspective. I don't know about UK, but So how would that CEO could actually through, a couple of months understand better the system as a whole? What could be I really don't like recipes, Jeremy, but some suggestions for the guy or woman who is really deliberately wanting the change.
So there's loads in there. So before I answer that question, there's a couple of things I just want to pick up that have really resonated in what you've just said. So I think you're right. I don't think there's a lot of academic work on just the practical business of being a leader with a systems perspective, and I think it's a crucial skill to understand, especially if we're talking about service organisations, which is where I tend to focus. They are complex systems, so they are dynamic, they're emergent, and the interdependencies are really, really important to understand. That they're often much more important than how the parts themselves work. So, the way that different functions in organisations interact with each other will often have much more influence than whether the individual functions themselves are well managed. So if the organisation is passing incomplete and inaccurate information from one part of the mortgage process to the next, that's going to have really, really damaging consequences. So the basic skill of understanding that you're in a complex environment and a complex system, to try and make that really simple is an important skill. And as you say, being an architect and a designer of effective systems that enable people to do good work, enable technology and people to work together in effective ways, I think is a very important skill. So the way that we frame that is to try and keep as much of the kind of complicated systems theory and systems technology to an extent in the background, and just to give people really, really simple frameworks. So that the first framework we use is to start people on outcomes. So we really understand outcomes well, what matters, and also, it's important to understand that outcomes might be important for stakeholders as well. So that could be shareholders or key leaders in the organisation. So having established that, the next thing that we help people to understand is what we would call the core capabilities. So the small number of things in organisations that need to be done really well in order to create good outcomes. So if we think about an end-of-life system, for example, a core capability would be to be able to have really good what matters conversations with people and their families about what matters to them as they reach the end of their life and the journey. And you would expect, it's a bit like the conversation we had at the beginning of the podcast, that would be something that happens. But when you study the system and you talk to people, you find actually that it's very rare that a really good what matters conversation ever really happens. Or if it does happen, it'll happen with kind of one person and one agency. But the system is characterized by multiple agencies interacting with people and their families. So you'll have, the ambulance service or social services, people visiting at home with home care. You might have district nurses, palliative care consultants. They might visit a hospice. They might go to hospital. And very often those interactions are separate, disconnected. So there is no kind of comprehensive, shared, clear understanding of what matters, and no systematic working amongst all the agencies on how we have really good quality what matters conversations. But when you study the system, you see that's a critical competency that the system needs. So that kind of leads us to the third element. And again, just want to emphasize that what we're trying to do here is kind of answer your question about how do you help leaders kind of begin to shift their perspective. So we start with outcomes, we look at the core capabilities, and we look at how well they're working. And then we look thirdly at what we call patterns. And the patterns are fundamentally the things that create friction in the system, that make it easier or harder for us to deliver the core capabilities. So in the end of life example, if we think about the core capability of having really good what matters conversations with people, a source of friction might be the functional boundaries between the different organisations. So they have different management structures, they have different objectives, they might have different policies and procedures. So you might have organisations all filling in different forms or different assessment frameworks, and that's actually the pattern that prevents kind of a collective view and people's ability to work on the core capability. Yeah. So really what we're trying to do with this really simple framework of outcomes, core capabilities and patterns.
Okay, so if if a new CEO is stepping into the company and he proceeds or she proceeds these 3 steps, how would those years where she or he is leading the company would be different from I think dysfunctional company?
There's probably 2 or 3 really important differences. The first one is that the CEO is embarking on a journey of kind of collective sense making. So what they're not seeking to do is reach their own diagnosis and impose their own solution on the system. What they're seeking to do is connect to ground reality, understand how well things are working from a point of view of what matters and how we deliver that. And they're seeking to find the sources of friction in the system. So they're anchoring what they're doing in sense making, and you can only make sense of what's happening in organizations by doing that as a collective endeavor. The second key thing, I think, is that they're then seeking to build a kind of an environment of fellowship and shared responsibility. So, this is a fundamental difference between the kind of dysfunctional and more holistic organization, is that we're giving people high levels of kind of structure in terms of kind of methodology and support and clarity of purpose, but also high levels of kind of trust and responsibility, so that people are able to, instead of kind of following top-down instructions and being tied up in knots by organizational procedures, they're co-creating solutions, they're problem solving together. So this idea of kind of fellowship and responsible action, I think, is a second very, very important aspect. I think the other thing that is really important for us, and an important distinction between dysfunctional and holistic organizations, is bringing together what we would call the social and technical systems. So by that I mean a lot of improvement science is very much focused on, the lean tools and how you do value stream mapping and how you redesign processes, how you do change management. A lot of that is really in the technical domain of kind of physical redesign of the system, and that stuff's important, but I believe very strongly that has to be combined all of the time with a proper understanding of the social system. So how do relationships in the organization work? How do we interact as human beings? How do our individual values affect what we bring to work and how we interact with other people? So understanding at an individual and collective level how the social interactions and the social systems work has to be combined with the kind of, the physical engineering work of improving work. So those three things of sense making, building a kind of culture and day-to-day practice of fellowship and responsible practice, and bringing the social and technical systems together as you take action is really a very different type of role, and I think resonates with your description of the architect role. And so just to kind of illustrate that a little bit, you talked about visual management systems. I think there's a huge amount of power to be had from really effective visual management practices, but it's very easy for those to be just imposed top down by the organization. Everybody's got to have
functional.
Everybody's got to have a visual management system. And as you say,
everybody has KPIs.
Yeah, everybody's got to have them. They've got to be up on the wall. But of course,
I need to see it because I need to control it.
Yeah. So, and then of course, what happens is the numbers in the visual management system are reported up the traditional organizational reporting system. So what you have is a kind of check up culture still. Actually, what you want with visual management is a deliberate design of that system to do what we call in Easier Inc. Kind of confirmation practices. So we're using the visual measures, but also structured agendas, structured processes of reflection and problem solving to create confirmation practice around the core capabilities, so that people.
Oh, that's a good point.
People are understanding: are we creating good outcomes? Where do we need to learn and improve? Are we working on the things that cause friction? Is that making it easier? Is that improving outcomes? But that lives in the space where the work is being done and the core capabilities exist. And the role of a leader is essentially to run sort of second order confirmation practices to make sure that those confirmation practice systems, visual management systems, are working well, not to have the results of those things reported back up the hierarchy.
Yeah, because if visual management is constructed in the way you just mentioned, I believe it as well gives the CEO the feeling of the ground reality, because then the people on the shop floor, the people in the middle levels, they would be talking the real things to me if I would be the CEO. So it would bring me closer to the reality, and that would help me to make as well more qualitative decisions rather than, be fast at the decision making without understanding the reality, as you mentioned.
Yeah, so you have there's a really interesting idea from viable systems method called recursion. So, a system has purpose, parts, and interactions, but systems can operate at various levels. So you can have a system where, at a small level, we're having really good what matters conversations, but that's part of a bigger system called helping somebody with their end of life. And that's part of a bigger system called a health and social care system. But in each of those levels, you can have a proper understanding of outcomes, of core capabilities, of patterns, and you can be kind of working on the patterns at those different levels. And therefore, you can build confirmation practices and visual management systems around them at those levels. That begins to change our understanding of how we see the structure. We don't see it as hierarchy anymore.
No, we don't, as networking rather than, wonderful. Yeah, and our podcast is now going to the end. And what I would love to do with you, Jeremy, is to record one more about those visual management boards and systems. How could that be done after the CEO have grounded the reality and, made the fellow purpose and the fellowship with the entire team? I think that could be something for our next series.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing, is to say, it doesn't have to all be solved in one go. You don't need to have a comprehensive system, visual management stuff from day one. The first thing to do on day one is learn how to connect with ground reality and understand what's creating friction in the system. And actually, you can begin to work on loads of things very quickly as soon as you do that.
Oh, yeah.
And then, as we become more mature, we can introduce, things like the visual management systems that will help maintain and embed and kind of drive further learning and improvement. And it stops us from backsliding. And it makes it everybody's business then.
Yeah, I think you're right. There is no need to start with the big steps. We all need to start with the small baby steps. So I want to thank you, Jeremy, for really being with us here today. And for those who want to know more about holistic enterprise, you can follow me on LinkedIn or subscribe the Lean CEO podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or Podbean. And regarding to Jeremy, you can as well Google him, Jeremy Cox, and you will find Jeremy on LinkedIn, and you can connect to him and say hello. So thank you everyone for listening.